This is the first movie to be fully and entirely shot in IMAX. And it's not even a superhero movie. Christopher Nolan just took an 3,000-year-old poem and turned it into the biggest conversation in movies right now. I watched it, my friends watched it, and walking out, we all had the same reaction. Quick refresher, because it's basically worth setting up before we even get into the movie, right? Odyssey follows Odysseus, played by Matt Damon, on his 10-year journey home, right? After the Trojan War, basically. 10 years, not 10 weeks, like 10 years of monsters, storms, gods who like him and gods who want him dead, and men under his command who don't all make it back, right? Back home, his wife Penelope, played by Anna Hathaway, is holding off a house full of suitors who think her husband is already dead, right? His son Telemachus, played by Tom Holland, is like coming of age, waiting for a father he barely even remembers, right? So you basically got like three timelines. Nolan is weaving together basically the war he's coming from, the journey he's on, and the home that's falling apart without him, right? And true to form, Nolan doesn't tell it in a straight line. He cuts between all three the same way he did with the timelines in the Dunkirk and Tenet, right? It takes a few minutes to get your footing, right? But once you do, it clicks, and it makes the back half of the movie even like it hit even harder, right? Nolan has never made a fantasy film before this one, right? Ever. Like superheroes, war epics, heist movies, physics thrillers, like sure, like, but never anything with monsters and gods in it. And instead of easing into the genre, he went and picked the like basically the oldest adventure story in Western literature to do it with, right? Basically, let's talk about like how this thing was actually made, right? Because it matters, right? Nolan shot this entire film on IMAX cameras. The whole thing, top to bottom. That's has never happened before. Like not for this movie, not for any movie, right? In the history of like the entire history of IMAX. This movie is fully native IMAX. No franchisee machine behind it. No cinematic universe. Just Homer and the biggest format in filmmaking, and it shows in every single frame. The set design here is some of the best I've seen in any movie, like period, right? Locations feel real because most of them actually are real. Nolan famously avoids leaning on CGI too much, and you actually feel that in every shot. And when Hoytma's cinematography and Ludwig Göransson's score do a lot of the heavy lifting too, right? The score especially is doing what his Oppenheimer score did, basically building dread and grandeur at the same time, so you feel the scale of the journey even in the quiet scenes, right? And this doesn't actually feel like a movie you watch, it feels like an experience, right? You sit inside of. And here's the part that actually surprised me the most is like, this is a 3-hour movie and it did not drag, not once. I sat through the entire runtime and never once checked the time or anything, right? Any other movie that's done that to me was Endgame, right? The Avengers. And that's the company Nolan just put himself in. And I don't say that lightly. If you're deciding how to watch this, here's my honest take. See it in IMAX 70mm, right? If you have one anywhere near you, right, just go watch it. And this is the one movie this year where the format is actually part of the storytelling, not just a marketing line, basically, right? Now let's get into the performances, right? Because this cast is stacked up top to bottom. Matt Damon as Odysseus is the anchor of this entire movie, right? Every scene he is in, he delivers, like full stop. The scene between him and Penelope is one of the most intense, most like surreal moments in the whole movie, right? That's the scene, that's going to get, clipped for years, right? Robert Pattinson's, plays the villain here, he's exactly the kind of, cowardly, cunning, this role actually needed. He's basically after the throne, and he knows it, and every line he delivers makes that clear without ever spelling it out. Pattinson's has been on this run for a few years now, like, because where every role he picks somehow becomes the most talked about performance in the movie, right? And this continues that streak basically. Then there's Tom Holland. I did not expect what Nolan pulled out of him here, right? This might be his best performance to date, right? And then Anne Hathaway is like precise in every single line she is given. Nothing wasted, right? And the gods around them are just as strong. Zendaya as Athena has this, quiet authority every time she's on screen. She barely raises her voice and still, commands every scene she's basically in, right? And Charlize Theron as Calypso and, Samantha Morton as Cersei both get to play seduction and menace at the, same time. And they're both terrifying in completely different ways, right? And Lupita is pulling like double duty here. Basically, she's playing both Helen and Clytemnestra. And honestly, you could miss it's the same actress if you didn't know going in, right? Basically. And then even further down the cast list, there's John Bernthal as Menelaus, and Benny Safdie as Agamemnon, and then there's Himesh Patel as Eurylochus, and they all get the movements that land. This is what Nolan does better than almost everyone working right now, right? He gets the best possible version of every actor in the room, right? No matter how small the part is, right? And underneath the monsters and goths, this movie is about something a lot more, grounded basically. And honestly, that's what makes it work, right? It's about coming home, after something breaks you, and finding out home doesn't just, wait around for you to get back, right? Odysseus spends the entire runtime becoming someone his own family, might not even recognize, right? And Penelope spends that same time becoming, someone basically who's had to survive without him, basically on her own, right? On her terms, not just waiting in a tower, right? And Telemachus, and is the one who really sells this theme for me. He's not just a kid waiting for a dad. He's a kid trying to figure out what kind of man he's supposed to become with no template for it, right? Nolan's, been circling this idea for years. Interstellar, basically was about what? A father trying to get back to his daughter across time itself. And this is basically the same wound, right? Just dressed up in Greek mythology instead of physics, right? And that's why, this doesn't feel like, cosplay. It feels like Nolan finally found the oldest possible version of a story he's been telling his whole career, basically, right? And now, like, basically, here's the part, the most reviews are saying. I want to be honest with you about it, right? Because this movie is not perfect. It's close, but not for perfect, right? First, the shipwreck scene, where Odysseus loses his men, is shot practically, which I respect. Nolan doesn't, lean on CGI, and that's admirable, right? But watching all of them cling onto that boat before going under, it took me out of the movie for a second, I'm gonna say, right? That one moment, I was it could have been executed better, right? It's a small stretch in a 3-hour movie, maybe like a minute of a screen time, like that I found it, but it's noticeable. Like it's a nitpick, obviously, right? But it doesn't take away from the the movie because everything is so polished, right? And second, the final fight, Odysseus taking on the suitors, who came to marry his wife. Most of the sequence is generally great, but the moment he gets surrounded, right, the choreography like feels kind of off there, I guess shaky. It feels like he's getting lucky instead of earning his way out, right? And that's the one action beat in the whole movie where the camera work took me out, like instead of pulling me back in, right? Like I would say there were a little more space, a little less shaky cam, and the movement lands exactly how the rest of the fight does, right? Like choreography could have been better, right? And the third scene, Scylla, the monster, basically the Nolan, basically made the choice to show us the fear on his men's faces instead of giving us a full clean look at the monsters. But I understand the instinct there. Like it's a restrained choice, and Nolan's whole career is built on restraint, I'm gonna say. But when do we when we get that finally we finally see the monster, CGI looks weak, and after everything else in the movie being built practically, that's one moment where it shows. Like I'm gonna say, right. I wanted one real epic reveal there, but honestly, it didn't fully land for me. Like I was confused a bit. But yeah, and critics are already putting this next to what Oppenheimer. Some are calling it like Nolan's best work, period. And I get it why, right? This isn't just a good adaptation, It's Nolan spending 25 years building IMAX's reputation just to point it at a poem, basically. That's the kind of swing, almost nobody else in this industry gets to take anymore, right? A $250 million movie with no built-in franchise, no existing fan base from a comic or a game, just Homer and Nolan's name on it. And it's already paying off. Like opening projections had this around 80 to 100 million domestically. With the reactions like this, the number is only going up. Like it's already like I think making $300 million right now worldwide, right? And Tom Holland, Zendaya, and John Burns all are in this movie, right? And 2 weeks from now, all three of them are back together in Spider-Man, brand new day, right? same actors, completely different genres, same summer, right? And that's not something, you see happen like very often, right? Like I have some, these are small nitpicks I had, right? They don't take anything away from the movie, like what this actually is. Like my grade for this Odyssey is basically A plus, like full stop. One of the best movies I've seen. Like literally, I would rewatch it again. I went in with high expectation because of who was behind the camera, and it still cleared the bar. Like if you've been on the fence about whether this is worth a theater trip instead of just waiting for streaming, here's my answer: go now, go big if you can. Right? This isn't a movie like that loses much on a smaller screen, but it does lose something. The scale is the point. And I'll say this too. Like my friend who watched it with me, shout out to them. Like they aren't the type gas up every blockbuster that comes out. They always all three of them landed in the same place I did, right? When a group that split on other movies this year all agrees on one, like that tells you something, man, right? And before we go out of here, right, quick ask: if you're not subscribed yet, this is the one to do it in. Drop a like, send this to the one friend who still hasn't seen it and want to hear from you. Comment below which scene in the Odyssey hit you the hardest, right? I'm going through every one of those basically. And quick note before we close this 1 hour: if you want more of Tom Holland and Zendaya before the Odyssey leaves theater, go check out my Spider-Man Brand New Day episode, right? Everything you need to know before that movie drops is basically right there. And so this is Tanveer Talks. See you in the next episode. Peace.